They wanted to teach me a lesson, to make me push a toy car in front of our church crowd while they listed every way I'd failed them. But what lesson do you teach parents who rent their success from their own daughter? That night, instead of showing up, I sent them a gift. When Mom opened it, her smile froze, and Dad stopped breathing for 5 full seconds. Merry Christmas from your disappointment. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. It was a little past 6 when I finally locked up the garage. The rain had started again, light and steady, drumming against the tin roof of Lane Auto and Repair. My hands still smelled like oil no matter how many times I scrubbed them. A thin smear of grease ran along the cuff of my jacket. I could have gone home, taken a shower, eaten something out of a can, and gone straight to bed. But Mom had texted 3 times about family planning night, and I didn't want to give her another reason to sigh into the phone about how I avoid family commitments. The drive to my parents' neighborhood always felt like entering a different world. Downtown Portland faded behind me. The streets widened, houses grew larger, Christmas lights multiplied until every roof glowed like a movie set. My truck looked out of place among the glossy SUVs parked along Maplewood Drive. The Lane house sat at the end, 2 stories of perfection. White lights wreath on every window, the smell of cinnamon candles spilling onto the porch. I parked on the curb, wiped my palms on my jeans, and told myself to breathe. Whatever she had planned couldn't be that bad. Maybe they were finally going to talk about Christmas dinner logistics, or Dad's new showroom. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe they could still surprise me in a good way. The front door wasn't locked. Warm light poured from the entryway, spilling across the polished wood floor. Inside the house looked like a holiday catalog, ribbons draped along the staircase, glass ornaments catching the glow of the fireplace. I could hear laughter coming from the dining room, the kind that rises in waves. Dad's deep chuckle, Mom's sharp high notes, Chloe's sugary giggle that carried too easily. I hung my jacket on the rack and followed the voices. Just before turning the corner, I slowed down. Something in their tone made me hesitate. They weren't laughing with someone. They were laughing at something. At someone. Mom's voice cut through first. "We'll have her wear that old mechanic jumpsuit. Oh, it'll be perfect. Everyone will love it." Dad's laugh followed, booming and certain. "A little humility won't hurt her. People will think it's funny, and maybe she'll finally see how ridiculous this phase of hers looks." Chloe chimed in, practically gleeful. "I already have pictures of her covered in grease. I can make a slideshow, maybe add a caption like Harper's handy mistakes." Avery's voice came next, low, uneasy. "Do you really think that's a good idea?" "I mean, she might..." "She'll survive," Mom interrupted, her tone sharp enough to slice. "It's family humor, Avery. She needs to learn to laugh at herself." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. My hand froze on the edge of the pantry door. The smell of roasted turkey and nutmeg filled my nose, too warm, too sweet. My heart slammed against my ribs. They were talking about me. They were planning a joke, a public one, and not the playful kind. Dad's voice, again, calm, confident, always the final word. "Pastor Mark will love it." A little comic relief during the church's Christmas video. "We'll make sure everyone knows she's doing fine, even if she insists on smelling like motor oil." The room erupted in laughter. I pressed my back against the wall. My fingers were trembling slick with sweat. I could see their shadows moving across the crack in the door. Mom gesturing Chloe, scrolling through her phone. Dad leaning back in that self-satisfied way of his. Avery's shadow didn't move at all. Just a mechanic. The words echoed so loud I could barely hear the rest. I wanted to storm in to tell them exactly what I thought of their perfect little show. But the sound caught in my throat, stuck somewhere between anger and heartbreak. I stayed still, forcing myself to breathe quietly to disappear. When Chloe said, "It'll look great on camera," something inside me shifted. The room spun slightly. The air tasted metallic, like I'd bitten down on a coin. Dad said, "It's settled then. Let's surprise her. She won't expect a thing." Mom laughed again, satisfied. That's the spirit of Christmas. Family togetherness. The hypocrisy made my stomach turn. I didn't realize my hand had slipped from the doorframe until I heard the faint creak of wood. I froze. The laughter stopped for half a heartbeat. Then Dad cleared his throat and the noise started up again. They hadn't noticed. I stepped back carefully, quietly. Every muscle in my body felt numb. My boots made no sound on the carpet as I turned away from the door, crossed the hallway, and slipped out through the side entrance. Outside, the air was colder than I remembered. The wind stung my face. The rain had turned to a fine mist that clung to my hair and jacket. I stood on the porch, staring at the lights twinkling along the roofline. From here, the house looked perfect, golden, and peaceful. The kind of image my mother would post online, with the caption #blessed. Inside those walls, they were laughing about me. I walked down the path to my truck, the gravel crunching under my boots. My breath came out in sharp clouds. I climbed into the driver's seat and sat there gripping the steering wheel, listening to the muffled hum of the heater. My reflection in the windshield looked pale and unfamiliar. Just a mechanic. That's what they thought. That's all they saw. The rain started again, tapping against the hood like tiny knocks. I swallowed hard, forcing the tears back, but they came anyway. Hot, sudden, uninvited. I let them fall for a few seconds, then wiped my face with the back of my hand. Enough. No more. Somewhere between one breath and the next, the hurt began to cool, hardening into something sharper. The pain didn't fade. It crystallized. I started the engine. The headlights flared, cutting through the drizzle. The house behind me glowed soft and false like a photograph that no longer belonged to me. My heart broke that night, and then slowly it hardened. The next morning, the air inside the garage felt colder than outside. The heater hummed somewhere in the corner, doing little against the damp smell of rubber and oil. I sat on the low stool by the workbench, coffee cooling in my hands, staring at a puddle of water reflecting the neon light above me. The reflection trembled every time a car passed outside, like it couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. A week before Christmas, the city was all glitter and comfort, lights strung across rooftops, people posting their trees on social media, families planning ski trips. I lived 15 minutes away from mine, but it might as well have been another planet. My family's life looked like one of those glossy Christmas commercials, laughter around the table, a matching set of sweaters, a mother who never raised her voice, a father who always paid the bill. It was perfect, at least from the sidewalk. My mother, Elaine Lane, ran the women's ministry at Grace Hill Community Church. People adored her. She hosted charity brunches, coordinated bake sales, remembered everyone's birthday. To the world, she was kindness dressed in pearls. To me, she was an artist of perfection, able to repaint every flaw until it disappeared. She'd say, "A woman's reputation is like glass, Harper. Once it cracks, everyone sees through it." She never realized I'd been shattered long before. My dad, Richard Lane, built his empire from furniture showrooms and a personality big enough to fill every room. Lane Home and Design had his name on every delivery truck in Portland. He called himself self-made, though Mom's parents had financed his first store. For him, success wasn't about craft, it was about applause. Every decision, every conversation circled back to the same question. What will people think? Avery, my older brother, was the answer to that question. At 35, he was an orthopedic surgeon. Tall, calm, perpetually polite. The kind of man who spoke softly, but carried the weight of everyone's expectations without complaint. Whenever he entered a room, Dad's chest seemed to expand a little wider. Then there was Chloe. 27, petite, radiant, always camera-ready. A dental hygienist on paper, a lifestyle influencer in practice. Her Instagram, her brand, was built on coffee shop selfies, travel reels, and the tagline, "Perfection is a choice." Mom called her my little miracle. Chloe called me Miss Oil Stains, and me. I was the footnote, the one who didn't fit the frame. The daughter who traded business suits for coveralls, Christmas parties for carburetors. I took a sip of cold coffee and let my eyes wander to the old photograph pinned above the desk, a family portrait from my college graduation. Mom in pale blue, Dad in his best suit. Avery smiling effortlessly, Chloe pretending not to be bored, and me in a black gown with a wrench charm pinned inside my sleeve, a secret reminder of who I really was. You'd never know from that photo that I'd already disappointed them all. I remembered the first time it happened. I was 15, sitting on the floor of the garage behind our house, taking apart the lawnmower just to see how it worked. My mother walked in high heels, clicking against the concrete. "Harper, what on earth are you doing?" "Fixing it," I said, proud that the engine was half disassembled. She looked around like she'd stepped into a war zone. "You're covered in grease. Go wash up before your father gets home. And don't touch that thing again. It's not appropriate." She never finished the sentence, but I heard it anyway. Not appropriate for Elaine. The memory bled into another. Years later, senior year, my guidance counselor calling my parents after I told him I wanted to apply to Oregon State for mechanical engineering. Dad's voice echoed down the hallway after he hung up. Engineering. That's manual labor with a degree attached. Mom followed, softer, but deadlier. We didn't raise you to smell like motor oil. They wanted business school lane home and design the family brand. They wanted another version of themselves. I tried for a while. I enrolled in their MBA program dream. 2 semesters in, I was miserable. I'd sit in finance lectures and sketch gearboxes in the margins of my notebook. The night I told them I was dropping out, Mom went quiet first. Then Dad dropped his fork so hard it clattered across the table. "So you're quitting," he said. "Just throwing away your future. I'm changing it," I said. But my voice shook. Mom stared at me like I'd confessed a crime. "You don't know what you're doing. No man respects a woman who works with her hands." I still remember the clink of her wine glass against the table, and the way Avery looked down at his plate, pretending the argument wasn't happening. Chloe, maybe 17, then smirked. "Guess I'll be the only normal one." In that moment, something small in me cracked. Not enough to break, but enough to make every family dinner afterward feel like walking on glass. Back in the present, the heater clicked off. The garage went silent, except for the faint hum of the city outside. I picked up a wrench, turned it in my hand, feeling the cold metal against my skin. My reflection stared back at me in the side mirror of a customer's sedan. Tired eyes, messy hair smudge on my cheek. The kind of image Mom would crop out of every family photo. The phone buzzed on the workbench. A text from her family video rehearsal tomorrow. 6 p.m. Dress appropriately. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I set the phone face down. I looked around the garage. The shelves stacked with tools, the smell of steel and dust, the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't elegant. But it was honest. Every bolt, every scar on my hands was something I'd earned myself. On the shelf above the desk sat another photograph, one Mom didn't know existed. Dad shaking hands with me the day I opened the garage, pretending it was a hobby that would pass. The smile he wore wasn't pride. It was patience, waiting for me to come to my senses. I traced the edge of the frame, remembering how he'd said, "You'll see, kiddo. You'll get tired of the grime. Everyone does." He was wrong. I reached up and took down the family portrait from the wall. The smiles stared back, frozen and flawless. For a second, I wondered if any of them actually saw me that day, or if I'd already disappeared behind their perfect reflection. The photo slipped from my fingers and landed face down on the counter. I didn't pick it up. The sound of it hitting the metal surface was sharp final. Outside, the rain started again, tapping on the windows like a metronome. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the night. Monday mornings in the garage had their own rhythm. Loud, steady, unbothered by anything happening outside. The air smelled like gasoline and metal. Every tool had its own place, every sound its own tempo. I liked it that way. It was a kind of order that didn't care about who you were or where you came from. You did the work, you earned the result. Simple. Honest. The garage door was halfway open, letting in the pale winter light. I was under a dark blue SUV, wrench in hand, tightening the bolts on the oil pan, when Ethan's voice echoed from the front. "You ever think about taking a Monday off, boss?" I slid out from under the car, wiped my hands on a rag, and squinted at him. "And do what watch morning talk shows." He grinned, holding a spark plug between 2 fingers. "Normal people sleep in Harper. You've been here since 7. "Yeah, well," I said, checking the torque again. "Cars don't fix themselves." Ethan laughed, the sound bouncing off the concrete walls. He'd worked for me for 4 years part-time, when business slowed down at his cousin's auto body shop. He was the kind of guy who'd tease you to your breaking point and then hand you a donut right after. The kind of person my family would call blue-collar with a certain tone, like it was a diagnosis. The doorbell chimed, a cheerful ding that always sounded out of place against the grinding and hammering. Miguel stepped in, shaking off the cold. He was still in his delivery uniform, the logo of a local bakery embroidered above his chest pocket. "Morning, Harper," he said, holding out 2 cups of coffee. "Fuel for the miracle worker." I smiled, taking one. "What broke this time?" He groaned. "Brake light. Again. I swear I've replaced that bulb 3 times this month. Cop pulled me over at Burnside like I was running a heist. "Pull it in," I said, pointing toward the last bay. "You'll be back on the road before your coffee gets cold." 10 minutes later, the job was done. Miguel stood beside me watching as I tested the lights. "You didn't even charge me last time," he said. "I like my croissants warm," I replied. "Consider it trade." He laughed, shaking his head. "You're too good to people you know," that I shrugged. "Someone's got to balance the universe." As he left, he waved toward the front window where the Christmas wreath hung crookedly. "You should fix that thing," he called out. "It's the only broken thing left in here." I smiled, half genuine, half tired. "I'll get to it." Not long after Miguel drove off, the door opened again. This time the footsteps sounded different, heels instead of boots. A woman's voice, sharp and careful, sliced through the noise. "Is the owner here?" I turned. A well-dressed woman in a beige coat stood by the counter, clutching her handbag like she was afraid the air might stain it. "That'd be me," I said, wiping my hands again. "What can I help you with?" She looked me over, eyes flicking from my grease-stained coveralls to the wrench tucked in my pocket. Her nose wrinkled slightly. "You're Elaine Lane's daughter, aren't you?" The name dropped between us like a coin in water. "I am," I said carefully. "I'm Marjorie Bennett," she replied, her tone softening only by habit. "Your mother and I are in the Grace Hill Women's Circle together. I had no idea this was your establishment." She glanced around the garage at the stacks of tires, the workbench cluttered with tools, the air compressor humming in the background. "It's quite something," I nodded. "What brings you in?" "My Lexus is making a noise," she said, as if the car had personally offended her. "My husband suggested we come here since the dealership is backed up for the holidays. I suppose this will do." I motioned toward the parking lot. "Pull it around. I'll take a look." She hesitated. "You'll be the one working on it, yes, ma'am." A thin smile appeared, brittle as glass. "Well, your mother must be very proud." I met her eyes. "She's never been here." Her smile faltered for half a second before returning smaller now. "Ah, well, good for you, Harper. Doing hands-on work?" The way she said it made it sound contagious. While I ran diagnostics, she lingered near the door, pretending to scroll her phone. I could feel her watching me, probably wondering what the daughter of Elaine Lane was doing crawling under cars. When I handed her the repair estimate, she signed it with a pen that looked more expensive than my rent. As she drove off, I saw a folded pamphlet on the passenger seat, a glossy flyer for Grace Hill Community Church's A Carter Family Christmas Video Event. I watched it flutter as the car pulled out the logo, catching the light. Of course, my two worlds were never far apart. They just liked pretending they didn't overlap. For a long moment, I stood by the open garage door, the winter wind cutting through my sleeves. Inside this place, I smelled like oil and smoke. Out there, I was the family embarrassment. But here, at least, I was myself. The day stretched on. Ethan and I replaced a set of brake pads, balanced 2 tires, and closed a stubborn hood latch with a hammer and prayer. By 5, the sun was already down. I flipped the sign on the door to closed, swept the floor, and finally sat on the stool again. My phone buzzed. A message from Mom. "Don't forget tonight's meeting for the Christmas video. 6 p.m. Dress appropriately." I stared at the screen. A faint smear of oil marked the corner of my thumb. I thought about washing it off, maybe changing into something clean. Instead, I set the phone face down on the counter and looked at my reflection in the darkened window. Behind me, the garage was quiet now. Tools neatly in place, the smell of the day still thick in the air. My reflection looked tired but real. No filters, no script, no stage lighting. The kind of image my mother would never post. I reached up and turned off the lights. The darkness folded in like a blanket as the neon sign outside flickered once, then went out. 2 days later, I pulled up in front of my parents' house again, the same perfect postcard that never seemed to age. The driveway glistened from a fresh wash. The wreaths on the double doors had been replaced with ones that sparkled under the porch lights and through the windows. I could already see people moving like stagehands before a play. Inside, the smell hit first. Pine candles, roasted almonds, and something sugary too sweet to be real. My mother stood in the middle of the living room, arranging white roses in a tall crystal vase, her hair perfectly sprayed into place. A camera tripod leaned against the wall, and a young production assistant was running cables across the floor. "Careful with those cords," Elaine said without looking up. "We can't have clutter in the background. The lighting crew is coming in 30 minutes. Richard, in his usual navy blazer, was pacing near the entryway, phone in hand, giving orders to the catering staff. Yes, 12 trays of the same dessert. Presentation has to be consistent. Chloe floated around with her phone held high, recording everything. Behind the scenes of the Lane family's Christmas video, she said brightly into the camera, "We're partnering with Grace Hill Church for something super special this year." She tilted the lens just enough to frame Mom, adjusting flowers behind her. I hesitated in the doorway, clutching the small grocery bag I'd brought with a few light bulbs Dad had asked me to replace. Chloe spotted me immediately. "Oh, Harper's here," she chirped, spinning the camera toward me. "Look who finally made it." I flinched at the sound of my name, the lens aimed like a spotlight. "Hey," I said softly, forcing a smile. "Don't get too close," Mom said quickly. "The camera picks up everything. And watch your shoes. Those floors were just polished." I stepped back onto the rug, biting my tongue. The house looked more like a studio than a home. Cables snaked around furniture tripods were lined up like soldiers, and on the wall above the fireplace a banner read Grace Hill Family Christmas. Filming in progress. "Where do you want me?" I asked finally. Mom glanced at me for half a second, as if remembering I was part of the family. "You can help set the table," she said. "But please be careful. We don't want oil stains on the linens." Her voice carried that effortless combination of warmth and warning she'd mastered years ago. I moved toward the dining room. Chloe was still filming. "This is my sister," she said into the phone. "She's helping out today. Say hi." I froze, caught between irritation and exhaustion. "Hi," I muttered. The phone lens hovered a second longer before Chloe turned it back to herself, smiling as if nothing existed beyond her reflection. From the hallway, I heard Mom call to one of the crew members. "Make sure you wipe the floor near the entryway. We can't have grease marks showing up when the light hits it." Grease marks. I knew who she meant. I looked down at my boots, clean for once, and still felt dirty. Pastor Mark arrived shortly after shaking snow from his coat. His presence filled the room instantly. Big smile, kind eyes, voice that carried authority without effort. "Evening." "Everyone," he said, clasping his hands together. "This will be a quick rehearsal, I promise. Just a few shots for the opening segment. The church board wants something heartfelt, family-centered, uplifting." Mom turned on her perfect social face. "Of course, Pastor. We're honored to be part of it. The Lanes just want to bring a little holiday joy to the community." Dad echoed her almost word for word, then introduced the crew. They adjusted microphones, checked angles, positioned lights. The soft hum of machinery filled the house like background music to a performance I hadn't rehearsed for. While everyone moved around, I started setting plates on the long table. White china gold rims, cloth napkins folded like swans. My hands were steady, practiced from years of pretending I belonged. Chloe's voice broke through. "Careful, Harper. Camera's rolling now." I glanced up. One of the assistants had swung the lens toward the table. My reflection shimmered briefly in the glass. Plain clothes, tied-back hair, the wrong daughter in the perfect picture. Mom stepped beside Pastor Mark, her hand resting lightly on his arm as she gestured toward the room. "We want it to feel natural, you know, real but polished." He chuckled. "You always make it look effortless." Effortless. That was the whole point. Everything about this house screamed effort disguised as grace. "Maybe we can add a fun moment," Pastor Mark said after a pause. "Something lighthearted in between the speeches. A little family joke, maybe." Mom's eyes flickered toward me, just for a second. A flash of something, amusement calculation, passed through her expression. Dad caught it too. "That could work," he said. "A small skit, perhaps?" Chloe giggled, clapping her hands. "Oh my gosh, yes. People love that stuff online." I felt the air in the room shift like pressure tightening inside a sealed jar. I couldn't explain why, but something about the look Mom gave me then, measured, sparkling, dangerous, made my stomach twist. "Let's think on it," she said sweetly. "We'll come up with something special." I stayed silent, pretending to polish a glass. The rehearsal wrapped quickly. The crew packed their gear. Pastor Mark thanked everyone, and Chloe ended her stream with a cheerful "Love you all" before collapsing into a chair to scroll through her comments. As the last assistant left, Mom turned to me. "Could you take those decorations to the pantry downstairs? I'll need them tomorrow." "Sure," I said, gathering the boxes. The house was quiet now except for the ticking of the grandfather clock. I carried the boxes down the hall, each step creaking under my boots. Somewhere behind me, I could still hear Mom's laughter as she spoke to Dad. I didn't know what they were planning, not yet, but the way her laughter lingered, soft, plodding, proud, told me, whatever it was, I wasn't going to like it. I reached the pantry door, hesitated, and pressed my hand against the cool brass handle. The faint echo of their voices floated down the hallway. My pulse quickened. Something was coming. I could feel it in the quiet, the kind of quiet that comes right before a storm. The house had gone quiet after the film crew left, the kind of quiet that settles in when everyone's exhausted from pretending. From upstairs, I could hear the faint hum of Chloe's voice, probably narrating a post for her followers. Somewhere deeper in the house, my father's muffled baritone drifted through the hall as he argued over a delivery invoice. I was halfway to the door when my mother's voice stopped me. "Harper," she called from the kitchen, sweet but sharp, the way she spoke to caterers she didn't tip. "Before you go, could you grab the ornament boxes from the pantry? I'll need them tomorrow." "Sure," I said automatically. The kitchen lights glowed low and golden, the kind that made everything look warmer than it felt. The smell of pine cleaner clung to the air. I crossed to the pantry door, pushing it open. Inside, the shelves were stacked with labeled bins, every holiday decoration categorized and controlled, just like the rest of the house. I reached up to pull down a plastic container marked gold ornaments, when laughter floated in from the next room. At first, I thought it was just background noise. Then I heard my name, Elaine's voice, clear and deliberate. Pastor Mark loved the idea of humor. "I think we should make it personal. Harper can wear that old mechanic uniform, God knows she still has it, and push one of those little toy cars from the kids' ministry. It'll be adorable." The box slipped a little in my hands. I froze. Richard's voice followed, deep and amused. "A little lesson in humility. The congregation will love it. We can make it about choices, how every path has consequences." My breath caught. I pressed my back against the shelf, praying the air would swallow me. Chloe's giggle rang out high and cruel. "I have those old photos of her covered in grease from last Thanksgiving. Remember when she showed up straight from the shop? I'll make a slideshow." Harper, the handy woman. "Maybe we can add some captions, something like, 'When ambition goes flat.'" Mom laughed, genuine and satisfied. "Perfect. It'll remind people that not everyone's path needs to be glamorous to be respectable. It's all in good fun, of course." Dad chuckled. "Exactly. A teachable moment. And after the skit, I'll make the announcement about the estate adjustment. Keep it symbolic. Ryan and Chloe will take on more responsibility with the business anyway. Harper will understand. Symbolic." Mom repeated the word, rolling off her tongue like sugar-coated poison. She doesn't need much. She's independent, right? That's what she wanted. The box in my hands rattled as my grip tightened. I tried to steady it, to steady myself. My throat burned, but no sound came out. Avery's voice broke through, quieter than the rest. "I don't know if doing this in front of everyone is—" Dad interrupted the way he always did when anyone hesitated. "Relax, it's harmless. She'll laugh along. Maybe she'll even thank us later." The others laughed again, as if he'd made a joke worth sharing. I stood there motionless, the light from the kitchen spilling in a soft triangle across the floor. Their words kept replaying in my head, twisting tighter each time. A costume. A slideshow. A public humiliation wrapped in righteousness. I'd spent years thinking the worst thing they could do was ignore me. I was wrong. My hand clamped on the edge of the shelf so hard my knuckles went white. A glass ornament rolled out of the box and hit the floor with a faint clink, but didn't break. My heart stopped anyway. The conversation in the next room paused for half a second. Then Mom's voice again, lighter, unbothered. "We'll finalize everything tomorrow. Richard reminded me to call the church about props." I waited until I heard footsteps moving away before I finally let go of the shelf. My fingers ached. I couldn't move at first. It was like my body had forgotten how to breathe. Not just a joke. Not just family teasing. It was a performance. A deliberate attempt to remind everyone, including me, where I stood. I set the box down carefully, afraid any sound might betray me. My reflections stared back from the pantry door's glass panel, eyes wide, face pale. Someone half recognizable. My chest hurt, not in that cinematic, tearful way. It was sharp, controlled a pressure that demanded silence. I'd been humiliated by them before, but this was different. This was planned, scripted, and they were proud of it. The voices had faded, now replaced by the faint buzz of the refrigerator and the hum of the heater kicking on. I pushed the pantry door open slowly, the hinges creaking just enough to sound like a warning. No one noticed. The house looked still picture-perfect again, centerpieces, lined-up candles, glowing, not a thing out of place. I walked through the kitchen, every step, careful, deliberate, like I was afraid the floor might give way. At the doorway, I stopped and glanced back once. The gold ornaments shimmered inside their clear container, catching the light like nothing had happened. But I knew better. Outside, the night air hit me hard, clean, and cold. I stepped off the porch and into the dark, my breath rising in white clouds. Somewhere behind me, my mother's laugh echoed, faintly, carried through the open window. I didn't cry this time. Not a single tear. The part of me that used to break had gone quiet. I walked toward my truck keys, cold in my hand, and for the first time that night, I realized I couldn't feel the wind anymore. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I was just cold. The parking lot behind the gas station was nearly empty. A single streetlight flickered above its glow, casting long, trembling shadows across the wet asphalt. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, just enough to bead against the windshield and blur the edges of everything. I turned off the engine, leaned forward, and let my forehead rest against the steering wheel. The cold metal pressed into my skin until it hurt, but at least it felt real. My chest rose and fell in short, uneven breaths. I didn't even notice I was crying until the tears pooled at the base of the steering wheel, catching the dim light. I tried to wipe them away, but more came. For a moment, the only sound was my own breathing and the faint patter of rain. I'd spent my whole life trying to be seen by them, not for what I could become, but for who I already was. Every step, every choice, every small victory was me waving from the sidelines of their perfect world. They never looked, and now they were laughing at the very thing that kept me standing. I whispered it into the silence, my voice shaking. I tried so hard. All I wanted was to be part of the family again, but they didn't want me. They wanted the version of me that looked good in photographs, the one who smiled quietly at their jokes and stayed small enough to fit into their story. The rain grew heavier. The sound filled the car like static. I blinked through the blur, fumbled for my phone, and scrolled down the contact list until I found her name. Lena Brooks. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the call button. It was late. Too late for anyone to pick up, but if I didn't hear another human voice right now, I wasn't sure I'd make it home. I pressed call. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Harper, you okay?" The sound of her voice cracked something open in me. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a sob. "Oh, God," she said softly. "Talk to me. What happened?" I took a shaky breath and started from the beginning. The filming, the smiles, the laughter behind closed doors, the skit, the lesson. I told her everything. Each word scraped my throat raw. I half expected her to interrupt to say I was overreacting, but she didn't. When I finished, there was silence. Not the awkward kind, the heavy, thoughtful kind that meant she was processing every word. Finally, Lena spoke, her voice low but steady. "Harper, do you remember Salem Plaza?" I frowned. "What, the commercial building I bought a couple years ago?" "Yeah, of course. Why?" "Because I was going through the rent logs earlier," she said slowly. "And something didn't add up. I thought you'd sold the lease to a management group, right?" "Right," I said. "They were supposed to handle tenants. Why?" "Because she said typing sounds clicking faintly in the background. The main tenant listed is Lane Home and Design." For a second, I didn't process it. "Wait, what are you talking about?" "Harper," she repeated gently. "Your parents' company? The one your dad runs. They're leasing Salem Plaza. It's their new flagship showroom." The world seemed to tilt. I stared at the fogged-up windshield, at my own reflection staring back. "No," I said quietly. "That can't be right. They'd never—" Lena's tone didn't waver. "I double-checked. The signatures match. They've been renting it for over a year." My pulse pounded in my ears. "You're saying they've been renting from me?" "Yes." I let out a hollow laugh, part disbelief, part hysteria. "Unbelievable. All this time they've treated me like I'm some failed grease monkey, and they're paying rent to their own daughter. That's not even the best part. She said, her voice dipping with hesitation. "They're 2 months behind. No payment since October." The laughter stopped. I sat there staring at the condensation sliding down the window like tiny rivers. My heart felt strange, not broken this time, not exactly angry either, just still. "How much?" I asked quietly. "Almost 12,000 total. The account's overdue. Technically, you could issue a notice of default if you wanted." If I wanted. The irony hit me all at once. How they'd mocked me for being a mechanic, for working with my hands while their shining empire quietly depended on the roof I paid for. The garage they laughed at had funded the building that carried their name. "Lena, I said, slowly, "You're sure about this?" 100%. I can send the documents right now if you want proof. No. I murmured, my voice steady now. I believe you. There was another pause. What are you thinking? I looked out through the windshield at the dark street, at the faint shimmer of headlights passing in the distance. I'm thinking maybe this Christmas they'll get a lesson about consequences. Just not the kind they planned. Lena didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than before. "You don't sound angry." "I'm not," I said. "Not anymore." The quiet stretched between us again, the kind that felt almost comforting. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my jacket and exhaled slowly. The rain had eased into mist again, whispering against the glass. "Harper," Lena said after a moment, "whatever you do, just make sure it's about you, not them. Don't let them decide the kind of person you become." I smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. "I won't. I think it's time they learned who I really am." She sighed, relieved. "Good. Call me tomorrow, okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Tomorrow." When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, staring out at the empty lot. The reflection of the streetlight rippled across the wet pavement like a flickering candle. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed 9 times. For the first time in years, I didn't feel helpless. The sadness was still there, but beneath it was something stronger. A strange calm like steel cooling after being forged. I leaned back in the seat and let out a slow breath. Maybe, just maybe, this Christmas would be different. I started the truck, the headlights cutting through the fog. As I pulled onto the empty road, the rain began again, soft, rhythmic, like applause fading into the distance. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of my laptop fan. The city outside had gone still, just the occasional whoosh of a car passing through wet streets. I sat cross-legged on the couch, a blanket around my shoulders. The light from the screen painting the room in cold blue. Lena's face appeared on the video call, hair tied in a messy bun, glasses reflecting the glare of her monitor. "Okay," she said, typing rapidly. "I've pulled up your LLC documents. Give me a second." My hands were still trembling slightly from earlier. On the coffee table lay a mug of untouched tea gone cold. I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear what she was about to say. "There," she murmured. "H. Lane Properties, LLC. Established 2019. Registered owner, Harper Lane. That's you." "I know," I said quietly. "I remember signing the papers." She scrolled through the digital lease file. Tenant Lane Home and Design Incorporated. Primary location, Salem Plaza, Portland. For a heartbeat, the words didn't land. Then they did, like a punch to the chest. "You're telling me," I said slowly, "the building my parents brag about is yours," she finished. "Their flagship store sits on your property." I leaned back against the couch, staring at the screen. The cursor blinked beside my name, steady and undeniable. My breath felt shallow. "I bought that place because it was undervalued," I whispered. "The broker told me the owner just wanted someone decent to take care of it. I never imagined." Lena turned another page. "Look here." She highlighted a paragraph in the lease. Clause 14C, 2 consecutive missed payments trigger immediate default. The landlord, you, has the right to issue a notice of default and deny lease renewal after 30 days. I read it twice, the words blurring slightly. 2 payments, I repeated. "They're 2 months late, right?" She nodded. "October and November. December's due next week." The irony settled over me slowly. The family that laughed about me fixing cars was surviving inside a building I paid for. The company that defined their worth was in violation of a contract they'd signed under my name. I minimized the document and opened my bank portal. The transaction history confirmed it. No rent deposits since early fall. The silence of those empty lines was louder than any argument we'd ever had. A memory crept in uninvited. I was standing in that same building the day I bought it. Bare walls, dusty floor sunlight slanting through cracked windows. The broker, an older man named Howard, had said, "She's an honest property, Miss Lane. She just needs someone who sees her potential." I'd smiled then, thinking he meant the building. Now I wasn't so sure. I scrolled through the list of tenants again, tracing the signatures on the digital forms. Richard Lane, Elaine Lane, Avery Lane as guarantor, my own father, mother, and brother, bound by ink to me. Lena's voice broke the silence. "You okay?" I closed my eyes for a moment. "Yeah," I said. "Just processing." "What do you want to do about it?" she asked. I looked at the glow of my name on the screen. I thought about my mother's laughter echoing through the pantry, The way she said lesson, like humiliation was a form of love. My anger rose sharp and fast, then steadied. I don't know yet, I said, but I'm done pretending I owe them anything. Lena studied me through the webcam. You don't have to rush a decision. Just know the leverage is yours. The leverage. The word tasted strange, almost bitter. I'd never had power in that family, not once. But now, sitting alone in the half-dark, I realized I held something they couldn't spin or manipulate. Facts. Paperwork. Ownership. I opened the property map. The building stretched across 2 lots. Prime retail space with new glass frontage. I remembered repainting the exterior last spring myself, a weekend project I'd told no one about. Every brushstroke had been a small act of pride-proof that I could build something from scratch. And now that same pride, that same quiet labor, had been funding the very people who called me a mistake. Lena spoke again, softer this time. Harper, you could send a notice tomorrow, or raise the rent, or... No, I said, cutting her off gently. Not yet. Her brows lifted. Then what? I stared at the document one last time, my name sitting above theirs like a signature of fate. Slowly, deliberately, I closed the laptop. If they wanted to make me the joke, I said, my voice calm, almost detached, maybe this time I'll let them be the punchline. Lena didn't smile. She only nodded, understanding something deeper in my tone. Outside rain started again, a steady patter against the window. I drew the blanket tighter around me, the soft fabric grounding me as my mind began to sharpen. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel lesser. I felt steady. The city lights flickered on the wet street below, reflections rippling like liquid gold. I watched them until my breathing slowed, and the weight in my chest settled into something clearer, colder. If they wanted a stage, they'd have one. But this time I'd write the script. The rain hadn't stopped since dawn. Portland in December had a way of folding the sky into the street, everything the same shade of gray. I parked outside Jonathan Hale's office, a glass and brick building downtown, and sat for a moment before going in. My hands were wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had already gone lukewarm. Inside, the lobby smelled like cedar and paper. The receptionist waved me toward the back where Jonathan's office sat, walls lined with leather-bound books, windows fogged with condensation. He stood when I entered, tall, gray-haired, in a navy sweater that made him look more like a professor than an attorney. Harper, he said, shaking my hand firmly. I read the documents Lena sent me. I assume you're ready to move forward. I nodded, taking the seat across from him. My reflection shimmered faintly in the polished wood of his desk. He opened a file folder, flipping through neatly tabbed pages. You're well within your rights. The tenants. Lane Home and Design have defaulted after 2 missed payments. A notice of default, followed by a notice to cure, will be the first step. If they fail to pay within 15 days, the non-renewal clause allows you to terminate the lease effective January 31st. I traced the rim of my coffee cup with my thumb. So this ends it. He looked up. Legally, yes. Personally, that's up to you. I let out a slow breath. I'm not doing this to get even. I'm doing it because I've spent my whole life being rewritten by them. It's time the story read the way it actually happened. Jonathan studied me for a moment, then nodded. Then we'll write it carefully. He turned his monitor around so I could see the first draft of the notice. My name at the top, their company below. Words that once would have scared me now felt strangely liberating. The door behind me opened before I could sign. A gust of cold air swept in along with a man in a camel coat. He was in his 50s, handsome in the way of people used to getting their way. Jonathan, he said, removing his gloves. I didn't realize you were with someone. Jonathan stood. Kendall Pierce. This is my client, Harper Lane. Pierce smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Lane, as in Lane Home and Design. I returned the smile, tight and polite. That's right. Well, he said, settling his coat on a chair. Then we've almost met before. My firm's been trying to acquire that property of yours. Salem Plaza, isn't it? Fine location, though I heard the current tenants are struggling a bit. Jonathan gave him a look that said not now, but Pierce kept talking. Real estate's about timing, Miss Lane. With your family's reputation taking a few hits, you might want to sell before the value dips. I met his gaze squarely. Funny, I said, that's exactly what people told my father before I bought it. I didn't listen then either. His smile faltered. I was only making an observation. I'm sure you were. I stood, sliding the pen across the desk toward Jonathan. But I'm not selling. Pierce looked me up and down, curiosity flickering into something like respect. I see. Well, best of luck with your family business. He left without waiting for a reply. Jonathan watched him go, then glanced back at me. You handled that better than I would have. I've had practice. He smiled faintly. Let's finish this. I leaned forward, signed my name at the bottom of the document, and felt something loosen in my chest. For years, my signature had been the quiet part of every family contract. The add-on, the token. Now, it was the deciding one. Jonathan slid the papers into an envelope and sealed it. Once this is notarized, it's official. Delivery can be scheduled for the 24th. I looked up. Christmas Eve. He hesitated. You sure you want to do that? Yes, I said. That's when they'll all be there. The church filming the guests the performance. They wanted an audience. Jonathan studied me again, then nodded slowly. All right. It will be delivered at 6 p.m. by courier. When I stepped outside, the air hit me like a wall of ice. Lena was waiting in her car across the street, heater running. I climbed in, rubbing my hands together. She didn't ask if I'd gone through with it. She could tell by my face. So, it's done, I said. Her eyes flicked toward the folder on my lap. Delivery date Christmas Eve. Lena let out a low whistle. That's poetic. They wanted to show everyone how perfect they were, I said quietly. I'll let them. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the rain slide down the windshield. You know, this might hit them hard, she said finally. I know. And you're ready for that. I looked out at the gray horizon, the rooftops blurred by fog. I was ready the night I realized they'd rather humiliate me than see me happy. Lena started the car. Then I'll make sure everything's filed and time-stamped. They'll get it right on cue. The wipers brushed another sheet of rain aside. Downtown lights glowed faintly through the mist, red-green gold like distant promises. In the reflection on the glass, I saw my own face calm and certain. They thought they were writing a Christmas skit. They didn't know I was scripting the ending. By the time we reached my apartment, the rain had eased into a fine mist. I watched Lena drive off, then carried the sealed envelope upstairs and set it on my kitchen counter. It looked ordinary, white, crisp, harmless. But Inzo, it was something heavier than revenge, quieter than anger. It was the truth folded neatly signed in ink and waiting to be delivered. They would unwrap it soon enough. My gift, tied not with ribbons but with law. By the time evening fell, the Lane house looked like something out of a Christmas commercial. Every window glowed with soft golden light, candles flickered behind frosted glass, and the driveway gleamed from a fresh layer of snow that had been strategically shoveled to perfection. Cars lined the street, sleek and expensive, their headlights sweeping across the immaculate lawn as guests arrived one after another. Inside the living room was transformed into a stage. A grand tree stood in the corner wrapped in white ribbons and glass ornaments that shimmered beneath the chandeliers. The scent of cinnamon pine and expensive perfume clung to the air. Voices blended into the hum of carols playing through hidden speakers. Elaine stood at the center of it all, radiant in a red satin dress that caught the light every time she turned. Her smile was camera-ready. Every expression rehearsed, every gesture flawless. "Welcome, welcome," she sang out as each guest entered, air-kissing cheeks and adjusting napkins that didn't need adjusting. Chloe, in a sequined gold dress, was already live on her phone. "Hey everyone, we're kicking off Christmas Eve at my parents' house. Look at this spread." She turned the camera to the buffet table, glittering with silver trays, and labeled hors d'oeuvres. "Isn't Mom amazing?" Elaine touched her arm. "Not so close to the fireplace, dear. The lighting's better near the piano." Richard hovered by the entryway. His navy suit pressed sharp, shaking hands with Pastor Mark, who had just arrived with his film crew. 2 young assistants carried equipment, tripods, a ring light, a portable camera, setting up near the window. Pastor Mark clasped Richard's shoulder. "It's good to see you, my friend. The church has been looking forward to this segment. The Lanes always embody the spirit of faith and unity." Richard laughed modestly. "We do our best." I could almost hear him from miles away saying those same words with that same practiced sincerity. The guests gathered as Pastor Mark raised a hand for attention. "Before we begin tonight's recording," he said warmly, "let's bow our heads in gratitude for family, for faith, and for the community that binds us together." All around the room, heads lowered, hands clasped. Cameras captured the moment. The glow of devotion, the perfect tableau of togetherness. Near the back, Miguel and Clara moved quietly between the tables, arranging boxes of donated gifts. They were volunteers from Grace Hill, helping the crew manage props and refreshments. Miguel glanced toward the camera setup, then leaned toward Clara. "You see Harper anywhere?" he whispered. Clara shook her head. "No. Thought she'd be here." Elaine must have overheard because she turned her smile unbroken and addressed Pastor Mark's camera directly. "Our eldest Harper couldn't make it tonight. She's working. She runs a little auto repair shop downtown. We're so proud of her independence." A few guests murmured approvingly. Pastor Mark nodded. "Every path is meaningful in God's eyes." Elaine smiled wider. "Exactly. We love all our children equally." Chloe glanced up from her phone. "Even the one who never answers group texts," she joked lightly, earning laughter from nearby relatives. Elaine gave her a gentle tap on the arm, part correction, part performance. Now it's Christmas." Richard checked his watch, already calculating how much footage they'd need before dinner. "Mark, maybe we should get that intro take." Pastor Mark nodded to his crew. The lead cameraman adjusted the focus while Elaine repositioned herself near the tree head, tilted at a flattering angle. The house fell into a hush as Mark began, his voice rich and solemn. "This Christmas Eve, we celebrate not just the season, but the families who remind us what faith looks like in everyday life. And tonight, we're blessed to spend it with the Lanes. A family whose generosity and unity have been a beacon in our community." Applause followed, soft and polite. Elaine dabbed the corner of her eye with a linen napkin, just in case the camera lingered. Outside, snow began to fall again, flakes drifting past the window like slow-moving ash. The lights reflected off them, turning everything into gold. The dinner hour approached. Guests settled at the long dining table, while Richard poured wine, and Elaine floated between seats, straightening cutlery, refilling glasses. Chloe narrated everything for her followers. "Look at this," she whispered to her camera. Mom even matched the centerpiece to her dress. #aesthetic. Miguel carried in the last of the gifts for the church drive. He was about to leave when the doorbell rang, a crisp, clear sound that sliced through the chatter. Elaine paused mid-laugh. "Oh, more guests," she said, brightly glancing at Richard. He frowned slightly. "Everyone's here, aren't they?" The bell rang again, longer this time. Elaine smoothed her dress and walked to the door. "Mark, keep filming." "Maybe it's a donation from the church. We can include it in the segment." She opened the door. Her smile already in place. A FedEx courier stood outside, jacket damp from snow, holding a thick white envelope sealed with a blue sticker, bearing the logo of Hale and Associates Law. "Delivery for Mrs. Elaine Lane," he said. "Signature required." "Oh," Elaine laughed softly. "That's unexpected. I wasn't aware we had anything coming tonight." She signed the tablet with an elegant flourish and accepted the envelope, the corners of it catching the candlelight. Richard approached from behind. "Who's it from?" "I'm not sure," she said, turning the envelope over. Hale and Associates. Perhaps something from the church committee. Pastor Mark smiled politely. "Could be a thank you note for your sponsorship." Elaine nodded. "Of course." She carried it to the dining table where the cameras still rolled and set it down beside her wineglass. The lens zoomed in briefly, capturing the embossed logo against the soft glow of the candles. Around it, laughter resumed, glasses clinked, and the perfect image of the Lane family flickered across every camera screen, unaware that the neat white envelope sitting quietly at the center of their celebration was about to change everything. The film crew adjusted focus for one last take. The envelope didn't move. It waited pristine and still bathed in light. The dining room sparkled under chandelier light, every reflection doubled by the polished silverware. Dinner had just begun. Pastor Mark stood at the head of the long table, hands clasped, smile bright for the cameras. "Before we continue, he said I'd love for the Lane family to share what's meant the most to them this year." Elaine's eyes lit up. She adored moments like this, attention packaged in reverence. "Oh, that's a wonderful idea," she said, placing her napkin delicately on the table. "We actually received something special tonight. Maybe it's a note of thanks from the church." She lifted the white envelope from beside her wineglass, the Hale and Associates logo glinting in the candlelight. "Perfect timing, isn't it?" Chloe leaned toward her phone camera, still streaming. An early Christmas letter, she whispered for her viewers. Richard chuckled, pouring himself another glass of wine. Let's hear it then. Might be one of those donor acknowledgments. Elaine smiled for this camera crew. I'll read it aloud. It'll make a nice moment for the video. She slid a manicured nail under the seal, unfolding the document inside. The paper was crisp and thick, embossed with formal lettering. Her eyes skimmed the first line, then stopped. The smile faltered. Her lips parted slightly. Notice of default, she murmured. The room went still. Richard glanced over. What Elaine blinked as if the words might rearrange themselves. It says, Notice of default, and non-renewal of lease. I don't... Richard reached across the table. Give me that. He snatched the papers from her trembling hands, eyes scanning the page. The red drained from his face. No, this. This isn't right. Pastor Mark lowered his fork, uncertain whether to keep smiling for the camera. Is everything okay? Richard didn't answer. His eyes darted down the page until they landed on the line at the bottom. Owner Harper Lane. He froze. The room blurred around him. Harper, he whispered. This says she... Chloe, still streaming, leaned forward. What's happening? Her mother's voice broke. Turn that off! What? Turn it off! Chloe. Chloe scrambled, fumbling with her phone. The live feed went dark. The cameraman from the church lowered his equipment, uncertain, but the lens had already captured everything. The moment of confusion, the crumbling composure. Elaine clutched the edge of the table. It must be a mistake, she said, her voice climbing higher. Someone mixed up the files. That building belongs to us. Richard finished bitterly. Apparently not. Avery, seated near the end of the table, leaned forward, his voice barely audible. Harper knows, he said quietly. She knows everything. The words hit like a crack in the air. Elaine turned toward him, eyes wide. What do you mean she knows? He swallowed. I think she heard you. The other night, in the pantry. Elaine's face went pale. Her fingers twitched against her wineglass. And then it slipped. The glass hit the table, rolled and shattered on the floor, red wine spreading like blood across the marble. Pastor Mark rose from his seat. Perhaps we should... No. Richard interrupted, voice low and shaking. Let it play out. Everyone's here now. Might as well finish the show. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the chandelier and the drip of spilled wine. Elaine picked up the paper again, scanning it as if she could rewrite it by force of will. This says the lease will be terminated as of January 31st, she whispered. Unless the tenant pays the outstanding balance immediately. Chloe's hands flew to her mouth. We're the tenant Lane Home and Design. Richard said flatly. Yes, sweetheart. We've been renting from your sister. The silence that followed was absolute. In that stillness, I imagined the scene. Their stunned faces, the way my father's jaw clenched, when pride collided with truth, the way my mother's perfect posture finally broke. I could almost hear the cameras stop rolling, the murmurs start to rise. The air would have been heavy, thick enough to choke on. The music paused, the laughter gone. No more masks, no more performance. I wasn't there, but I could see it. I could feel it. The silence after the truth lands is its own kind of thunder. Elaine stared down at the papers, her reflection rippling in the spilled wine. Her hand trembled as she whispered almost to herself. She did this to us. On Christmas. Richard's face hardened. No, he said quietly. She did this because of us. Around the table no one spoke. Chloe's phone buzzed once ignored. Pastor Mark gestured subtly to his crew to stop recording, but they were frozen, unsure whether this was still part of the act. Elaine pressed her napkin to the spill, dabbing at the stain like she could erase it. Her eyes unfocused, her breath unsteady. This can't be happening, she murmured. It's humiliating. The last word hung in the air, sharp as a blade. I imagined the moment they realized what humiliation actually felt like. The clinking of silverware stopped. Even the children in the adjoining room fell quiet. Avery sat back in his chair, the first to look away from the wreckage on the table. Maybe he said softly, "It's time we stop pretending everything's perfect." Elaine turned to him, eyes wide with disbelief. "Don't you start, Avery. Not tonight." But no one else spoke. Not Richard. Not Chloe. The cameras stood still, recording a tableau of ruin. The family that built its reputation on image frozen in its first honest moment. And then there was nothing. No voices, no movement, just the heavy, suffocating silence that comes when truth finally settles where lies used to live. The snow outside had softened into thick, white silence. Morning light spilled through the cabin windows, pale and clean, brushing across the wood floors. I sat cross-legged near the fireplace, nursing a mug of cocoa that had long since gone cold. The flames hissed softly, throwing flickers of orange across the faces around me. Lena, Miguel, Ethan, and Clara. We'd cobbled together a Christmas dinner from whatever the small-town grocery store had left open the day before pasta garlic bread, and a pie that came in a dented tin. Somehow it was perfect. Miguel was telling a story about nearly losing a delivery truck in a snowbank, gesturing with his hands like the hero of an action film. Ethan laughed so hard he nearly spilled his cocoa. Clara leaned back on the couch, her eyes half closed, humming along to the faint music from Lena's phone. It felt safe, small, unperformed. The kind of peace that didn't ask me to smile for anyone. Then the vibrations started. My phone lying face down on the kitchen counter buzzed once, twice, then continuously. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Lena glanced over her shoulder. "You gonna get that?" I shook my head. Not right now. But it didn't stop. The screen lit up again and again, a relentless rhythm against the quiet. I finally walked over and flipped it. 30 missed calls. All from Mom. The latest message blinked across the screen. "Where are you? Answer me right now." I turned the phone face down again and walked back to the fire. By the time everyone finished eating, the laughter had slowed. Miguel stacked plates in the sink, humming off-key to a Christmas song. Clara yawned, wrapped herself in a blanket, and fell asleep in the armchair. One by one they drifted off the cabin, settling into the kind of silence that only comes after warmth. I waited until I was sure everyone was asleep before slipping on my boots and stepping outside. The cold hit instantly sharp and clean. Snow fell thick around the porch light flakes, spiraling through the air like feathers. The mountains beyond were shrouded in white. For a moment, I just stood there listening to the hush. Then the phone started vibrating again. I answered. Elaine's voice tore through the line before I could speak. "Where are you?" she demanded, breathless, half fury, half disbelief. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You humiliated us, in front of everyone, in front of the church." Her voice cracked high and raw. "Your father had to send people home. Pastor Mark doesn't know what to say. People are calling. The cameras caught everything." I leaned against the porch railing, watching snow gather on the banister. My voice came out calm, almost gentle. "Merry Christmas, Mom." "Don't you dare," she hissed. "Don't you dare act like this is normal. You think this is funny. You've ruined our name. You've destroyed everything your father built." I let her words hang there. The wind moved through the trees, slow and hollow. "Mom," I said finally, "did you enjoy my gift?" Silence. For a moment, the only sound was the static between us. Then her breath caught sharp, like she'd been struck. "You," she whispered, "you did this on purpose. You planned it." "You're right," I said softly. "I planned it, just like you planned your little skit." "That was a joke," she screamed. "A harmless joke," I almost laughed. "A joke about my life, my work, me. Tell me, Mom, how's that harmless?" She didn't answer. I heard movement in the background, a door closing, my father's voice low and strained. Then her again, shakier now. "You've made this family look ridiculous. You've made me look ridiculous." I exhaled, watching my breath turn white in the air. "No, Mom, you did that yourselves. I just stopped covering for you." For the first time, she didn't have a reply. The silence stretched so long that I thought the line might have dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "You've broken this family." "No," I said quietly. "I just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken." There was another sharp inhale, a small sound of disbelief. Then she hung up. The snow fell harder. I stared at the phone in my hand, its screen glowing faintly against the dark. One new text appeared almost immediately. "My father, we can talk about this. Don't do anything rash. Let's find a solution." I read it twice, then pressed the power button until the screen went black. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was clean. For the first time, I could breathe without guilt choking the air. I tucked the phone into my pocket and looked up at the sky. The snow kept falling steady and endless, covering the tracks I'd left on the porch. I inhaled deeply, the cold slicing through my lungs, sharp and pure. It didn't hurt. It felt like freedom. The morning sun spilled across the cabin floor, gold and clean, after a night of heavy snow. The air smelled like coffee and pine, and the fire from the night before had burned down to a soft bed of embers. Outside, the world glittered, a white silence that made everything feel new. I stood at the counter stirring sugar into a mug, listening to the faint crackle of a Christmas song from Lena's phone. She and Miguel were in the kitchen arguing about who made the worst pancakes. "You burned yours," Miguel said, flipping a lopsided one. "They were caramelized," Lena shot back. Gordon Ramsay would call that texture. Their laughter filled the space, easy and familiar. Ethan and Clara were still asleep upstairs, their muffled snores blending into the quiet rhythm of the morning. For once, there was no rush, no need to perform, no one waiting for me to apologize for existing. I sat down by the window, coffee warming my hands, and opened my laptop. The signal was weak, but the emails finally loaded. Near the top was one from Ruth Lane. "Grandma." The subject line read simply, "Proud of you." I hesitated before clicking. Her message opened in soft black text against a white screen. "Harper. I heard what happened last night. Don't worry about what people say. You did right. Families can lose their way, but standing up for yourself is not a sin. You deserve respect, child. Don't ever forget that." Tears filled my eyes before I even realized it. Grandma was the only one who'd ever seen me for who I really was. She'd been the one to hand me my first wrench when I was 12, the one who said hands that build things are hands that bless things. I wiped my face and leaned back in the chair, watching sunlight scatter across the snow outside. The weight in my chest was gone. I wasn't angry anymore. What I felt now was something quieter, peace, or maybe release. Images flickered through my mind like fading film. Mom's sharp voice, Dad's disappointed stare. Chloe's camera always aimed just right, Avery, pretending not to hear the cruel jokes. The countless times I'd been told to wash my hands before dinner, to wear sleeves that hid the stains to try harder to fit in. And then those words, just a mechanic. For years they'd felt like a sentence. Now they felt like freedom. I smiled to myself, just a mechanic. Someone who fixed what was broken, who found worth in what others threw away. Someone who built instead of pretending. The door creaked behind me, and Lena appeared, her hair messy from sleep, 2 mugs in her hands. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." She handed me one of the mugs. "Then you need this. Merry Christmas, Harper." I took it, the heat seeping into my palms. "Merry Christmas, Lena." We sat in silence for a while, watching the snow melt into glittering droplets along the window pane. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled above the white trees, slow and certain. "You think they'll call again?" she asked eventually. "Probably," I said. "But I won't answer." She nodded like she understood completely. I looked out at the horizon where the mountains met the sky, blue bleeding into white. For the first time, it didn't remind me of how far away I'd gone. It reminded me how far I'd come. I thought about the people inside this cabin, the ones who hadn't asked me to shrink to fit their expectations, who hadn't laughed when I got dirty or tired. They didn't need me to be perfect. They just let me be human. Family wasn't blood. It was choice. It was the people who stayed when everything else fell apart. I took another sip of coffee, the taste bittersweet and grounding, and said quietly, mostly to myself, "I used to think family was something you had to endure, but sometimes freedom comes when you finally walk away from the table where you were never respected." Lena smiled, nudging my shoulder. "That sounds like something you should write down." "Maybe I will," I said. "Maybe I'll start with last night." We sat there until the fire crackled back to life and the rest of the house stirred awake. The day stretched ahead of us, unplanned and peaceful, full of the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. When I stepped outside later, the snow crunched under my boots. The air smelled like pine and cold sunlight. I tilted my face toward the sky, breathing in deep until my lungs ached a little. It was a good ache, the kind that reminded you that you were alive. Behind me, the door opened. Miguel called out, "Hey, Harper, you fixing breakfast or what?" I laughed. "I'll fix the coffee maker first. Then we'll talk breakfast." Their laughter followed me as I walked toward the car parked by the tree line. The hood still carried a thin layer of snow, catching the light like glass. I brushed it off with my sleeve and whispered to the quiet morning Merry Christmas. If anyone had told me a year ago that I'd find peace in solitude, I would have laughed. But peace wasn't the absence of people. It was the presence of truth. And mine was finally beautifully quiet. If someone out there has ever made you feel small inside your own family, remember this. You were never born to be their joke. You were born to be your own story. You deserve respect. You deserve your own life, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is start living it.